Oh, okay, I think it's good. Okay, hi everyone. So welcome back to the Let It Matter. This is a new blog series for us called Embodying Faith. And so I am so honored for Aundi Kolber to be joining us today. She is an author and a therapist, and she has written these wonderful books. Try Softer, a fresh approach to move us out of anxiety, stress, and survival mode and into a life of connection and joy. And you can see, I don't know if you can tell, my copy is just marked up from head to toe. And then recently, when was this? It just seems like in October, right?
October 5th. Yep.
October 5th, this the Try Softer Guided Journey, a soulful companion to healing, was just released. And so I am so excited. My first introduction to you, Aundi, was I think of a personal friend of yours, Jelaine Sunberg, now Jelaine White. I think
Okay.
she knows you. But she was telling me about your work, and then my brother and sister-in-law attend a church where they started a program called The Art of Care. And they used your book as like the textbook for how
That's
to
awesome.
care well for church members. It's sort of a not really counseling, but sort of a how to care well as you minister through the church. So I became familiar with your work there, read it, and I've told you this, but my mom read it, my sister-in-law read it, my brothers read it, our family has just been changed by it. Generation in our family has been changed by your work. And so if you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and about Try Softer and about how you got on that journey.
Yeah. Well, thank you. It's so fun to get to actually speak with you. I know we interact sometimes online, and that's great, but there's something about, actually getting to use our voices that's really special too.
Yes.
That's just so cool. What an honor. I'm so glad you're doing this. I love that you're putting this emphasis on embodiment and what does that mean for faith. And I know we'll get into that, but so I am located in Castle Rock, Colorado. I'm a licensed professional counselor. I hold like a small practice that I continue to do as I'm also doing writing and speaking. And I am married to Brendan. We have 2 kiddos, and Brendan, if you follow my writing at all, Brendan's like my person. So I'm so grateful for that. And just my journey is that I am a survivor of complex trauma from my childhood. And that is this, I think that word sometimes gets thrown around, but how I use it is that it's chronic and unresolved attachment, developmental, relational, psychological trauma that I experienced throughout childhood. And one of the things that was confusing, I think, and which is why I think it took me a long time to identify myself as a survivor of trauma, is that I learned how to white knuckle, and that sometimes looked really good on the outside. Like on the outside, I looked like I had it together. And not to say that those things weren't, like whether that was in school or basketball, but internally, I felt really unsafe, or I was extremely anxious or depressed, at times dissociated. And I didn't have any language for that. I didn't even know how abnormal that was until I became a therapist. It was before then. I started to really do my own work in grad school. But even then, so this is like 16 years ago, the field of trauma was just beginning to really name some of what we're really talking about now, the nuances, like how trauma, it really matters how it's experienced by your own body.
Yeah.
And so my work has been probably about 8 years ago. I started to really lean in to sort of like body-centered therapies, things like EMDR, which is a trauma modality. things like attachment theory and interpersonal neurobiology and understanding our nervous system. And so that has been both from a personal level, but also with my clients and my family. And it's like the work of my life. Like it's so interspersed, like both personally and professionally. So that's really what led me to write Try Softer. It's the overflowing of all these things that I wish I had known, that I wish that someone at 20 years old was like, here's this book. I really think it would be helpful for you to read it.
Yeah, it's been so, I told everybody that I tell about it. It feels like a therapy session, but with an accessibility and a gentleness, that it's, I think there's, lots of other books that you can read that feel so academic. And that this is so packed full of the science and the academia, but it's so approachable. And so it does feel like a gentle read. It also doesn't like gut you on every page. You give people space to feel it after you do gut it. Those first, some of the attachment stuff and early on, those first two chapters were like, and when I was reading it, I was specifically in a season of coming out of a relationship that I was able to identify a whole lot of dysfunction because of attachment stuff. And so it's tough, but you give space. And what I even love in, you talked about white knuckling in the workbook, you say like, I don't even love workbooks. I don't love workbooks because it can feel like you have to white knuckle, like to get through the workbook in a certain amount of time, or, this is the next exercise. So even if I don't feel safe in my body to do it, I have to. And you confront that early and then regularly as you get through the exercises, you say, hey, and if this isn't your jam right now, got it. Move on, pick a different one. It's okay to slow down, engage your sensory toolbox, and all of these things that that really give space, I think, for people to not white knuckle as their, as what can feel like sometimes people sort of put outside or undue pressure, don't you think, on themselves with workbooks?
Oh my gosh, yes. I know. I was like laughing with my editor as I was like working on this, and I was like, I don't really do a lot of workbooks.
Right.
And she was like, well, what if you just said that? And I was like, okay,
and
it was
I so appreciated that because it felt on not on brand. That's a really gross way to say that, but you know what I mean? It felt on message for the message of Try Softer, which is to not like crack a whip.
Right.
It's to do the opposite. So,
well, and I think what's so interesting about this, like, first, I just want to thank you for that feedback, because one of the things that felt really important to me about this book is that I feel like there's a gap, and I think that gap is closing a little bit, which is great. But there has been a gap around, okay, here's all this knowledge, right? Here's like the knowledge, like The Body Keeps the Score has become a hugely popular book, which is great. There's some really important stuff in there. It's not necessarily a therapeutic book though. Right. Right. And that's where, like, even though I really value that, I felt like something I could bring, and I tried to do to the best of my ability, like, how can we make this feel like not only knowledge, but an actual resource, in the sense of like, when you're going through it, how we go through it is as important as anything that's written in it.
That's so true. That's so true.
And I think a lot of times all of us, we forget it, right? We think, well, we have the thing, so we're good. Or like, I'm in therapy, so I'm good. But how it's done, how we are with ourselves, that's the work, right? And so my goal and part of my hope has been to say, if I can model for you that you are allowed, and really I invite you, and I want to empower you to listen to the pace of your own body, because that's where we're going. Right. I mean, that's what healing is. Like,
that's the journey and the end goal in this specific, in this book, in your work, is to become more familiar when your body is trying to tell you something, right? To listen to it.
Yes.
And so if you're
Yes.
pushing through those messages to get to the end goal of listening to your body,
Yeah.
it's sort of, yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
It defeats that purpose.
Yeah. And ultimately can be harmful. I mean, for folks with a history of trauma, the pace matters.
Mm.
You know, it's like what is maybe helpful to you further on in your journey may not be helpful to you early on. And that's okay. There's no shame in that. And that's part of, why it's so important to really continually, I try to invite people to check in with themselves. Like, just because I'm offering this doesn't mean you have to do it. You get to choose. And that really matters, that that you have a choice.
That's right. That's right. And it does feel like that. You mentioned the sort of more recent developments in talking about trauma and in talking about trauma being stored in our bodies. One of the phrases that you use in, I think, in your self description and also just in the work that you do is trauma informed. And so, as we see more and more, at least accessible science
Mm-hmm.
for laity, for the public, um, as we see more talk about that, about trauma, then we also start to see more people, trauma informed yoga or trauma informed therapy modalities or whatever it may be. Can you sort of tell us, first of all, what does it mean to be trauma informed as a practitioner? And then who does that serve? Who could look for, if trauma is part of their story, what kind of things might they look for in the trauma informed umbrella?
Yeah. Yep. Well, this is a great question, and one that there's actually a ton of nuance. And so I think it's good to talk about. I started using trauma informed probably 4 or 5 years ago. And the reason I started to do that is because, as someone who works in the Christian space a lot, I was wanting to identify that I'm trying to come from a different lens. Like, I do not solely rely on talk therapy. And that is something that I'm grateful to see, that especially probably the last year and last year and a half, there's been more. Even though I'm grateful for that, there's some that gets a little tricky, because words can mean a lot of things to a lot of different
Yes.
people. And so I have a little bit of, just to be totally honest right now, a little more mixed feelings than I used to, because I think when something gets overused, sometimes it can lose its meaning. And so, all that to say, for me, how I view that, first and foremost, from a really wide lens, is that I really see it as an orientation to humility and to honoring others and ourselves. Love your neighbor as yourself. It's this honoring of saying, your experience and how you're experiencing this moment matters. And how I'm experiencing this moment matters. And so I say it to start there, because I think that it's an evolving thing. It's something like, as we learn more about trauma, something that we might not have known 2 years ago, we may begin to be like, oh, this is really significant. We need to recognize that. And so I think there's a sense of like allowing that to change and grow. And that's where that humility really matters. It's a willingness, to have a posture of like openness and hearing as we're able, But in a more practical sense, I would call trauma informed, one of the things that I believe to be non-negotiable is understanding our window of tolerance. Like, understanding that there's a range of arousal in which people can be fully with themselves. Their brain is online, their body's online. And when we go past a threshold, we go into fight or flight or fawn or freeze or a form of dissociation. And the ramifications of that are so significant that at minimum, they're uncomfortable. And at the maximum worst, they can be re-traumatizing.
Right.
And so I think that this lens of understanding that people hold stories in their bodies, these stories inform how we show up in the world in the here and now. For folks who have histories of trauma, those stories can get activated very quickly and without a conscious decision.
Mhm.
And so for me, specifically as a therapist, there is, I believe, probably the highest calling in terms of the trauma-informed piece, because not only am I aware of these things, but now I'm working with them. I'm not only knowing that and trying to respect it, but I'm trying to steward it. I'm trying to invite, and in a way that's tolerable to that person, help them move towards healing and metabolize pain. But really, that starts with honoring the nervous system. It starts with honoring the story and that person. But I think what you're also saying is that there are other folks, there's yoga instructors and spiritual directors, and sometimes in schools. And I think this is a conversation that's starting to happen in churches. And I think some of the principles definitely translate. I think about things like yoga and, trauma is stored in the body.
Right.
When we move in a certain way, when we are trying to move into the body, it requires profound respect for the impact of trauma. One thing I learned early on is we need to do our best not to activate someone's trauma unless we have a lot of skills to help them contain that again. And unless, we have to be very, I think of it like all of us need to respect the power of what happens to our bodies when a trauma is activated. And so I think that goes back to just those basics around like understanding, just even very simply, like that happens in a body. I think things like giving people choices and consent, like as it works for you, if this feels okay, is an important piece. And then ultimately, I think it's also important to have even some really basic skills around helping people come back to themselves. Now, that doesn't mean you have to be like trained in EMDR and a trauma therapist, but just even like some containment skills, some grounding skills. I think that really is important.
That's what I loved so much in your book. It's not written just for practitioners it's not, it's so inclusive. It's laity. It's just the person on the street. It's somebody with their own trauma or someone who is in the life of someone else who has experienced trauma. And that we know the statistics that a significant amount of people have faced their own trauma, whether or not they, are in a place to vocalize or to deal with it, or, I love the way you said that, to metabolize it. Or not, there's such an invitation to all of us in your book. So I really appreciate that perspective. One of the things that, and I told you this, I think it was before we started recording, but one of the things that was so groundbreaking, and it shouldn't be, right, for Christians, but was so groundbreaking in your work, was the regular, often conscious, sort of just repeated narrative of our belovedness to God, individual belovedness, not just our collective, right? It felt personal, not just because we're you didn't use a lot of we language to depersonalize it, and so one of the phrases you use specifically is an embodied knowledge of our belovedness to God. And I wanted to see if you could help us understand what that is and then how to access it, maybe.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that came through. This idea of belovedness, I'm certainly not the first person. Henry Nouwen is really the person who really first introduced this in this particular light to me. But I think of belovedness through the lens. First of all, on a personal level, in my own healing journey, I began to, in my own experience of God, felt like God began to call me that. And maybe has always called me that, but I was able to receive it. And that's why, like in social media or things like that, a lot of times I'll do a capital B. And I do that because it's like, it's my name. Like, and it's not just my name. I believe it's all of us individually. Like, I think we can claim that. And I think from a psychological standpoint, what has felt so honestly exciting to me is to understand that this makes so much sense in terms of our need for a safe and secure attachment. And, you know, my own journey is that I have a lot of attachment trauma. And it's like, I had a sense early on, it's not like God's love. It's like I knew about it. And sometimes I could even access it, but it wasn't like embodied. It wasn't like, this is what I'm living from. Like, this is like the truest thing about me. Like, I can like plant myself here. And so when I write about that, this embodied knowledge, it's an invitation and a prayer and a hope that as we do this work of, you know, of compassionate attention, of stewarding God's compassion towards us, of allowing the people who are with us in our lives who are safe and kind. And as we steward that and we bring all of that in our body, what is so cool is that we begin to have access in a different way. And that's what I think of as embodied. Like, it's not just a fact. It's not just a Bible verse. It's not just a memory. It's an experience of knowing that, like, this is who I am. And, you know, I think as people hear that, I want to just acknowledge that folks are probably on a whole spectrum of that. Some people might hear that and be like, yeah, that's where I am now. And you know what? God bless that. That's amazing. And for some folks, they're like, gosh, that sounds wonderful, but like, I don't know if that will ever happen for me.
Right.
And I try to use really open understanding of like, this is sort of an already, but not yet. Like, I think the invitation is there. And as we live into healing, as we live into reparative experiences, sometimes it's like going outside and seeing something beautiful.
Yeah.
And what does that feel like in your body just to be with that? Even for a moment? What would that be like to know that like the God of the universe is with you in that? And could you just touch that for just even a moment?
Yeah.
Because I think for a lot of us with trauma, paradoxically, goodness can be hard too. And so even that we have to actually pace ourselves with. And so a lot of this work is about, we sort of like dance with it, sort of touch it, and then you back up and you're like, can I stay with it a little longer? Okay. You know, and I think over time, our bodies begin to learn how to internalize it and experience it more consistently. And it begins, it continues our movement towards healing.
I totally agree with that. It's such a non-linear thing, right? Like, there's times that I can access that belovedness embodied in me very quickly and easily, or that it doesn't feel like I even have to access it, like it's already there. And then there's times that I have to really sit and, you know, give myself the quiet and give myself the space, or that it just feels like maybe I'm on autopilot today, or, you know, whatever it may. But I noticed, so when I would think about, like you said, when I would think about like being loved by God or the love of God, it didn't feel like anything in my body. And when I heard the term belovedness, there was a soft edge to it. I don't even know how to describe this. There's a softness and a warmth to it in my chest, in my low back, in my, and like what feels, I don't know, bosom is not a great word, but you know, like in my arms and in this sort of space where it feels safer. It feels, because the love of God, maybe, you know, in people's stories might have been used in terms of tough love, or
that's right,
you know, harsher realities that may not be what of our experience of love could be. But beloved feels like a term of endearment. You know what I mean? It feels
Mm,
closer and more intimate and kinder and with such softer edges,
mhm,
um, than even just the love of God, which
mhm.
is hard to already soften, you know, but I
Yeah.
guess our experiences can, you know. Um, before I know we're gonna wrap it up right quick. I was just gonna see if you mentioned throughout the book breath prayers and body scanning and grounding, and there's all kinds of different techniques that you give, even for mindfulness, that comes out of your mind and engages your body.
Mhm,
And I was gonna see if real quick you could lead us,
mhm.
just guide us through a process you pick, and
Sure.
something that might serve us as we walk in this journey of embodied faith.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah, thanks for sharing that and about the belovedness piece. And I think
Mhm,
that's true. I mean, I think sometimes we have to explore sometimes what does it look like to reclaim something
mhm,
in a way that is, and again, part of that, it depends on your story. It depends on all these different things, right? But if that allows you to access something it's, it's not that it wasn't true,
right.
but it's that it feels more true in your body, and I think that that's just important. So I just want to honor that. And yeah, I love and just really value the practice based elements of so much of this work, because we can talk about this all day and there's good there.
Mhm,
But so many of us are trained to sort of talk over our body. We sort of bypass our body, we
mhm,
ignore our body. I mean, that's a very Western culture concept, to just not value the body. And man, that's not how we're designed. We're designed for integration and wholeness, and we can't bypass the body. So as we think about this, there's so many different practices, but and if you've heard me speak on other things, you probably heard me talk about this, but I almost always talk about grounding. And that's because it's just so accessible and so easy, but also so helpful. And so, the first thing I would just say is that if you're going to engage any practice based, I mean, frankly, just about anything, like if you feel like you're not fully yourself, I think even grounding is something to explore. And there are different ways to do this, but the main idea is that you're using your five senses to bring yourself really fully into the here and now, partly because typically the here and now is safe.
mhm,
And so what we're doing is we're inviting our body, our neuroception, to really get connected into the present, so that our body can really come into our window of tolerance, so that we're online. And so, for example, with grounding, if it's possible, I love to invite people to go outside, because it really activates your senses. Just noticing the firmness of the ground beneath your feet. If it's summer, take your shoes off, feel the
mhm,
grass, smell the air. Can you hear anything? Is there something like that you can taste? Is there multiple things that you can touch? Noticing the details. Sometimes I combine this with something that I didn't make up this term, but it's called beauty hunting. And as a way to be like, it's a mindfulness practice that's really looking for beauty. All of this can kind of come together in grounding. And what we're looking for with grounding is a sense like, I feel like myself, or even a sense of neutrality, a sense of even homeostasis. It doesn't mean that everything is perfect. It doesn't mean that everything is over and like, you know what I mean? Like
right, right.
it's not so much that, but there's a sense that we have a deeper access to ourselves. And that's a place from which we then, I think, can really interface with God in a different way, which I think is matters. And then, so from there, like generally speaking, like a lot of times when I lead someone in a practice, I'll say something like, from a grounded place. So
Okay.
if you're not grounded, go ahead and get grounded
Oh, I think they got
before
it. Got it.
before you do anything else. And then another one, like I love, and I think breath prayer has really become something that is a lot more, folks are utilizing a lot more, which I think is amazing. One thing I like to say about breath prayer is that if your body is still in a place where you're maybe feeling pretty anxious or feeling, not completely safe, one of the things that tends to be true is that when our exhale is twice the length of our inhale. So we'll maybe do that in just a moment. But so like maybe it's an inhale of 4 and an exhale of 8. What we're signaling to our body in our nervous system is that we are safe. And so what that can do is help us down regulate. And so that's just a helpful thing to know. However, if you're in a place where you're just practicing this from just like you're already regulated, you're already grounded, part of what you might just look for is just a rhythm, like a rhythm. That might just be inhale 4, exhale 4. And we're just, part of it is like, we're looking for some ease. We're looking to get to a place of ease. And when we're pairing that with a prayer, part of what's beautiful about that is we're anchoring that in our body. So like a short one that I think is, as we come up on Advent, I'm thinking about like Emmanuel, God with us. And so maybe you and I could just do that for a moment. And I'm not going to say the Emmanuel, but like if you're listening and you want to go along on the inhale, Emmanuel, and then exhale, God with us. And as you're doing this, if like the 4 and the 8 is too much, just feel free to adjust it. This is just like a framework.
One of the, really quick, I just wanted to also share, after your book, I changed my either centering prayer or breath prayer, what I say. I say, I like, it's calling the names, but I say, I am, and then beloved. So like I'm with God, but it's the peaceful, non-performative. We don't have to do anything to have each other's attention, that I am. And then beloved, as if those are our 2 names, but I'm also saying I am beloved.
Yeah, I love it. I love that.
So that's just to share another one. If people are kind of running up on this, like if we're outside of Advent, or, people sometimes get Advent burnout right after, like if it's January. So whenever they're listening to this, be another access point. Yes. But I love that manual is so beautiful. So let's go ahead.
Yeah. Well, and just one other thing I was going to say, because you'll probably see me do it, because so a lot of times when I do any kind of breathing, I'll put my hand like on my heart, and you can't see it, but I'll put my other hand on my stomach, because I just feel really supported. And then the other thing that I do, which hopefully I'll try not to make it sound, well, I'll just be aware, but my breath, I have found, so you want to inhale through your nose, and you want to exhale through your mouth.
Okay.
And as we're doing this, I almost like when I have any, and again, if this is like too many things to track, if someone's like just starting this, like no worries, just like do what you got to do. But I like to use my breath to sort of almost like any tension that's in my stomach. It's like I'm blowing that out.
Release it. Okay.
Through my mouth. And so you might hear that my exhale can be pretty strong. So just
please feel safe.
Things.
Yes.
Yes. So just know, I just explain that because some of this is just like a rhythm that I have learned, but explore it and see what feels good to you.
Yeah, I think some people may need the permission for theirs to also be releasing tension. So that's great.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for doing that with me. And yeah, just for anyone who's listening, I think, gosh, I just invite you to just be so kind as if this is new for you, especially if you have a history where you've had to be disconnected from your body, just honor your pace. As small as you need to go, as slow as you need to go. Like there is no shame in that. That is like the heart of Try Softer, is that you would listen to that pace.
Oh, that's so beautiful. Thank you again so much. You guys, Try Softer. It's available. I never can get the camera right. It's available wherever books are sold, but independent bookstores. Request it from your library. Maybe not the workbook, because don't write in the library's copy. But get these. I'm also going to be doing a giveaway with these starting next week. And so would be so happy to resource any readers, listeners of this series with those things. I will put where people can find you, your Twitter, your Instagram. I'll put it in the blog post and in the notes on the YouTube video. So you don't have to, people always like, and then I have to spell it out for you.
Right.
So I'll do all that. But thank you so much, Aundi. Oh man, this has just been so rich and such a joy to get to host you in this space, for you to come and bring a blessing and such an honor to everyone who's been able to listen. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. I'm gonna stop.